Today we got Caleb with us. He's the founder of Runify and recently built and exited the app in just 3 months.
Legit locked myself in a room. I think I spent 3 days, 12 hours just designing the whole app. We made like almost $1,000 from like signups for Runify before we even had a product. So I think it was a 4.x multiple of MRR in the end.
What were your first impressions when we initially reached out to you?
Yeah, I remember it was super random. I got like a DM from your ex account. I often get like DMs saying like, you want to sell, or you like trying to sell me something. And yeah, but at that stage I had like no plan of selling.
How did you really make that decision to sell or not?
I think like apps are like one of the like harder businesses to necessarily sell. I also had in the back of my mind, like usually apps that are so young come with like, regardless of like revenue, an app that's 1 month old like comes with a lower valuation.
What was due diligence like from your side?
It was a new experience and I was like, I need to make sure I'm not getting like scammed here. But once the LOI was signed, then like you're starting to hand over personal details, company stuff, that's like where it gets risky.
Curious if you felt like, there might have been wanted to wait for another couple of months before selling, if you had any regrets as such.
No, honestly, I was pretty happy like with the outcome, and like that was like big reason to why I actually took the deal. It's getting to a point where like the underlying technology is like almost irrelevant and worthless, because you can like most apps you can like vibe code like 80% in like a couple days.
How would you approach like building an app that's sellable? What's up guys? Welcome back. We got episode 3 of Inside Micro P. Today we got Caleb with us. He's the founder of Runify and recently built and exited the app in just 3 months, from ideation to having the entire deal done, closed and cash in his bank account in just 3 months. He's gonna run us through how he ideated the product, built it, distributed it and eventually got an exit. And now we actually were consulting with the buyer that bought the business with Caleb, and we had reached out to him, which was just a cold outreach because he was posting about Runify on Twitter. So that just shows you like the power of building in public. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us today, Caleb.
Thanks for having me.
Dude, it's really awesome. Like it feels like a full circle moment, from initially when we messaged you about Runify to now us doing like a podcast together to discuss your exit and what the deal looked like. So maybe we can start with understanding a little bit of how you first came into the app industry, and what initially attracted you about it.
Awesome. Yeah, so pretty much like my story is a little bit more rogue. I'll keep it relatively short and then like jump into the Runify sort of stuff. But I came across like a personal problem that was like really niche in like my real life sort of activities. And then I searched up a solution for that problem. And then I came across like a small Reddit community. And in hindsight, the problem was very, very small. But there was like a massive flow of like posts every single day of people having the exact same problem, but there was no solution. And so I ended up building an app for that. And like this was before like vibe coding and chat GPT. I guess like chat GPT was okay for sort of coding, but I ended up building that on a no code solution. So I actually learned a lot, like a little bit, not a lot, like a decent amount of like sort of technical stuff through that. And then randomly I kind of jumped a ship from that idea because I reached out to Blake Anderson on Twitter because he made a post about his recent app that he was working on. I think that was over a year ago. No, it was probably actually almost exactly a year ago. And it was just a random tweet that I think he was actually replying to someone. He said, we're looking for like schizo, like cracked engineers or something along the lines. And I like sent over like a message and stuff, sent that to him. And then, long story short, ended up working there at 10x it was as CMO for a month and a half. And then, unfortunately that was closed down. There's no need to touch on too much of that. And then that kind of left me in this like turmoil sort of like position where I had like, I wasn't really excited to work on my previous app. I was no longer working on 10x. So I needed to figure out something to work on. And what I came to was Runify. And pretty much how I came to the idea of Runify, like I'll talk on this a little bit more, but I wanted something that lied like quite close to like my passions, like something that I would be like genuinely excited to build, because that was like one of my biggest frustrations with my previous app was like I honestly didn't care about like the product, the solution, like it wasn't a fun product to build. And I think you don't always need it to be like super, super fun, but you need a
Yeah.
balance, like a good sort of founder product fit, sorry, for yeah, the apps that you're building. And I was getting, let me think about the time frame. Yeah, so the year previously I had like massively got into running. So I like in the beginning I was like I ran like a 12K with my girlfriend and then ran a half marathon, then ended up running a marathon, and long story short I got injured. But I was like super super passionate about it. Probably
Yeah.
like arguably my only hobby at the time. And I've always done like gaming in the past, and I just kind of like thought of that idea like ranked running would be like a cool
Mhm.
concept. And yeah, so pretty much I started looking into the idea of ranked running as an app. Like, what would that actually look like? Does anyone want this solution or this product?
Yeah.
Sorry. Because that was another thing with like my previous app, I had learned like I kind of just jump straight into the deep end about like, let's build this solution for this problem, where it was like, do people actually want this solution? Is this the right solution? So I was like very meticulous about my sort of like validation for Runify. And what I did in the end was I didn't start building the app or anything. And one of those reasons was I knew it would be a little bit more of a technical product to build. But I created a Instagram account, a TikTok account, and then I just like found a sort of like viral, repeatable format that I could copy. And I actually copied that
Yeah.
off
Yeah.
Liftoff, which I'll touch on in a little bit because that's like super interesting. That was part of my validation. And I just started
Mhm.
posting these videos. I was posting 9 videos per day. And I think I did that for a week. And like I was pushing all that traffic just to like a HTML site, which I built with
Yeah.
ChatGPT, which had like a Stripe integration and like a wait list. And I think within like a week and a half, we had like 2,000 email signups, and we had over 100 people pay $5 for like a
Yeah.
lifetime subscription. But that was before the product was built. So pretty much that
Mm.
gave me the
The
it
validation. Yeah.
yeah, it gave me the validation to actually start like building this product out. Um, and yeah, went from there. So pretty much, I posted on my story actually. I'm looking for designers, developers, marketers on Instagram and X, and I got like a decent amount of inbound from that, and that was like
Mhm.
associated to my time at 10X because people recognized me from that. So I actually had my like co-founder of Runify reach out to me on that, and he was technical. And yeah, we ended up building the product, which took a while. Like that was one of my regrets in hindsight, was like I was probably
Mhm.
like again just learnings, probably
Yeah.
overbuilt a little bit, like could have refined the sort of MVP.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall it was super interesting stage because oh yeah, so yeah, we went from the validation stage to like pretty much the design stage. I legit locked myself in a room for like 3 days, designed the whole app. Like I think I spent 3 days, 12 hours just designing the whole app, because
Mhm.
then my co-founder doesn't have to like kind of like do any
Yeah.
guesswork about like where things are meant to go, how flow is going to work.
Yeah.
And then it was like really just about like whilst he was building the product, like continue pushing marketing. That was like probably one of the biggest things that we did for Runify, which is like really valuable, especially for a product that takes like a little bit longer to build, was like we were actively marketing nearly the whole time. Not as much as you would with a like fully distributed product, but we changed our like traffic, not our traffic, we changed our link from a like the landing page with the waitlist and Stripe, because like waitlists like convert like terribly. Like you might get like 1% of people who actually like sign up for the email list to
Mhm.
actually download your app and then pay. So we actually put Runify up for it's like a feature where you can pre-order the app. So we continue pushing marketing, and when I say marketing, we're just doing this one sort of format. It was like a 5 second loop. It like showed the sort of like ranks and times for a specific distance, and it just
Mhm.
performed really well. So I think we had almost 3,000 pre-orders for the app, which pretty much means the second we click release, it's going to
Yeah.
automatically download
Yeah.
the app to 3,000 people's devices, and Apple will also send them an email saying, hey,
Mhm.
like this app's live. So it's better than an email list because
Yeah.
with your email list, chances are like 30% of your emails are just going to end up in the spam folder.
Yeah, no, it's a lot better, and the app is already on their phone. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
exactly.
Dude, that's really interesting. So you basically went from being CMO at 10x to ideating your own app to a six-figure exit in 3 months, right? So I'm curious, like, what was that like? What was your end goal with Runify, right? Because when we initially reached out to you, I think you were maybe like 3 weeks into building Runify, right? No, sorry, 3 weeks into the launch, right? So you had already launched, you had some revenue, some paying users. So I'm curious, like, what do you think your end goal was, and yeah, why you decided to sort of maybe take an exit instead?
Well, what was super interesting was, yeah, I wasn't even like considering an exit just due to the nature of how long we had been live and even how long we'd been building. But in
Hmm.
terms of like what my goal was at that stage was there's an app called Liftoff, which is pretty much
Yeah.
like ranked for the gym. So it's very we I use that as like a heavy amount of like inspiration for Runify. Pretty much taking an idea that's like making money and like works, but kind of like not reinventing the wheel entirely, but changing the wheel a little bit. Um, so they were a massive point of inspiration, and they've been doing like 200. I think at the time they were doing like 100, 150K a month, 100
Wow.
to 200,000
Yeah.
dollars, 100 to 200,000 downloads as well. So like that was like the target we sort of were going after because we were thinking like if this ranked gym app can do this, like running definitely can because I'm pretty sure like running's like quite bigger, quite much.
Yeah,
Sorry, running is a lot
definitely.
bigger than working out.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, like, so it is still a very competitive space, right? It's not like, like there's not dozens of running apps out there. So I'm curious, like, how you maybe like did that initial, market analysis or competitor analysis, and then yeah, how you tried to, or how you decided on what to differentiate Runify with.
Yeah, that's like was a big thing. Like one of the biggest sort of concerns with building Runify was like competing with Strava, just because
Hmm.
they're like one of the there's probably a handful of apps, I would say maybe 10 that have like a monopoly on these sort of like niches, and Strava is definitely one of them, especially as of recent, as they just
Yeah.
acquired like Runner, like they are like monopolizing the running space. So that was a big thing. And I kind of came to the thesis that like we don't want to compete directly with Strava. We want to kind of be like a layer above them,
Hmm.
as like particularly for a user who's looking for a little bit more. And that was a lot through like my own experience. And this kind of relates back to like why I think having sort of like a passion and like relation to the product is super valuable because I remember when I would go out and run a 5K in like 23 minutes, I would come home and I'm like, what's the average time for a 21-year-old male who runs a
Yeah.
5K? And like I couldn't really get an answer. And I couldn't get a grasp of like where I kind of stack for my age group or even in general. Like, is that a good run or is it not? And you get all sorts of like different data when you search it up because people can run 5Ks in 3 minute paces in 15 minutes and it's ridiculous. But the average runner doesn't do that. But there wasn't that sort of like feedback loop. And so that's like one of the reasons why I was like, okay, a ranking system where you can kind of compare yourself to strangers, your friends, and there's like that sort of benchmark to go off. But yeah, in terms of like validating the product, I pretty much do this for all my apps. I look at the main competitors, like categorize them into direct competitors and indirect
Yeah.
competitors. And then
Yeah.
I'll do like a big market analysis on how they're getting their users. Are they leaving anything on the table? Yeah, their revenue, their downloads, like just trying to piece together their business model and like take pieces from it, but make it work for our sort of idea. And like I was never trying to just be another running tracker. We were
Yeah.
really heavily leaning into the ranks and the gamification of Runify. That's
Hmm.
what appealed to the users that we did acquire.
Yeah, yeah. No, makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I really liked about Runify was the onboarding.
Yeah.
I think that really immediately stood out to me. Is that something that y'all went through a lot of iterations on?
Yeah, that was definitely, I think we've rebuilt onboarding like 3 times.
Yeah.
And that's like that we did that mainly because we had like findings throughout. Like once we launched, we kind of figured out like, okay, this isn't converting, like we've got to switch something up. So I can't even remember exactly what our first onboarding was, but it was relatively simple and relatively short. And the conversion rate for the paywall was really low. So I kind of like wanted, and that was when we were really focused on like the ranks, where we kind of like changed our onboarding to position the ranks as like a sort of like use the ranks to help you achieve X.
Nice. No, makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like you and your co-founder put a lot of effort and a lot of hours into this. But I'm curious, like, how do you, I think there's something that you mentioned that initially you all might have like over-engineered the app a bit or overbuilt it. So I'm curious, like, how you actually figure out when you're doing that, and where to try to draw the line.
Yeah, I think that's a like something that you just learn with experience ultimately, but
Yeah.
most apps you really just like one main feature should be what you aim for. Like we I would say our biggest mistake was like we wanted to build like a template system, and I won't get into like what that does too much, but the like thinking behind that was we really wanted like product led growth. So pretty much they like do their run, they have like this like aesthetic sort of like way to share their run. And
Mm-hmm.
then through that, the users will be posting that on their socials, and then like they'll have a
Yeah.
watermark mark, and then through that, like it increases like the K factor. But that's like quite a difficult sort of product to build and like crack
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have as like MVP on top of like the ranks, and it was just a lot. And then like the
Yeah.
actual app itself, like we have a home feed, like, that's quite a lot to manage with a leaderboard system. We had like all the rank logic to build. Like that's one thing that
Mm-hmm.
we didn't have was like Liftoff, and there's a couple other apps like gym apps which have like rank logic, so you kind of use them as inspiration. But for running ones, there's so many more like variables that we had to consider. So like your pace, your distance, but then there's like elevation, there's like temperature. We didn't include temperature, but there's so many variables that we had to think of and then build formulas for like the specific distance because we have distance ranks as well.
Yeah.
So quite a lot of technical stuff went into that. But yeah, directly to answer your question about like not over engineering is like I think giving yourself is a time frame is like pretty
Yeah.
valuable.
It's the deadline.
Yeah.
Makes sense, makes sense. So maybe switching gears to the exit a little bit. I'm curious, like, what were your first impressions when we initially reached out to you? Right, I think you were posting about Runify. It was around $1,500 or $2,000 in revenue so far for that month. It was still the first like month of operation or of having launched the app. So yeah, I'm curious what your first impressions, of a potential exit. Yeah, what were you thinking?
Yeah. I remember it was super random. I got like a DM from your ex account, and I think I was kind of a
Yeah,
dick. I think you not a dick, but I just like I didn't really give much because I often get like DMs saying like you want to sell or you like trying to sell me something. And then I think I ended up responding, and then you said something else, and then I think you have like a setter or like someone who does outreach for you, and then you
yeah,
like
we have
hopped
an
on, you like yeah, you have an outreach guy, so yeah, then you hopped on and was like this is like actually me, like let's just jump on a like a short call and I can kind of walk you through what's going on. And yeah, but at that stage I had like no plan of selling. I think I like asked you guys to give me like a ballpark sort of like figure based off like some basic like revenue numbers just to like
Yeah.
make sure it's like worth my time, which sounds like shitty, but I've heard lots of stories of people hopping on calls with people who aren't serious, or sometimes just like parasites trying to get like info, and it turns
Yeah.
out to be a competitor. Like that's quite normal as well.
No, I totally get the hesitation. I think generally most sellers should be cautious, because like you said, there are actually a lot of competitors just simply trying to get your information. And usually these cold DMs, they're just trying to sell you something, But in this case, we were trying to buy something from you, which was obviously pretty different. And yeah, I'm curious, like, it was only like a 30 day old app, So how did you think about how to value it? And how to especially value the time that you had put in.
Yeah, that was like Very interesting. I was saying to you at the beginning of the call, I'm pretty sure like when we were like doing a little bit of negotiation, like we didn't even have like a full 30-day period of time to like look at revenue. So we kind of had to like, I think we had like 26, 27 days. So we had to kind of like look at the trajectory, and then like there was a bunch of trials that were about to trigger. So figuring out like the valuation and on that was like definitely interesting because it was like I was saying in the back of my mind, like usually apps that are so young come with like, regardless of like revenue, of an app that's 1 month old, like comes with a lower valuation. Where if you were to sit
Yeah,
on that for a couple months, you might just like naturally increase your valuation if you can hold like your certain like revenue
yeah,
marks or even increase them.
yeah,
Because like you could download an app, like crush it 1 month, but there's no proof that that's gonna continue for the months after. So naturally, I was like thinking the revenue multiple would be a little bit lower. So I just, yeah, in terms of valuing it in my mind, I was like, we've been building this for like 2 months. Like I feel
mm,
very bullish about the product, particularly with like Liftoff being where they're at. And I was
yeah.
like, I'm open to like hear you guys out, but it's going to make sense for the time that I've committed and like, yeah, moving forward as well.
Yeah, no, that made a lot of sense. And I think like we were at 2000 MRR at that time, right? And we gave you a little bit more than a four times annual revenue multiple, right? And I think that was for a variety of reasons. I definitely think like just how well y'all had built the app, the amount of effort and thinking that had gone in, and just the fact that it had grown to 2000 MRR in just that first month really made it stand out to us, especially compared to the other deals that we were seeing. So I would even say like relatively we gave you a fairly high valuation, um for the fact that it was only a month old, right? And that there wasn't that much, history behind the app. But I do think that that was justified with just simply how good the app was. And then also like the kind of deal that we did, right? Where you were retaining like a meaningful chunk of equity, you know? So it's not like you were being just paid that entire lump sum up front, So I think the deal was well structured and where the incentives were well aligned for both sides. Yeah, I'm curious like when when you were probably going through the exit, was there anything that, you felt that oh, you wish you had done right while you were running the app or beforehand? Because what I really liked about you guys is that y'all had everything super well organized. So it made due diligence really, really straightforward and easy. But yeah, I'm curious if you felt like, there might have been maybe you might have wanted to wait for another couple of months before selling. Or yeah, just like if you had any regrets as such.
Uh, no, honestly, I was pretty happy like with the outcome, and like that was like big reason to why I actually took the deal. Like you said, I think it was a 4.x multiple
Yep.
of
Yep.
MRR in the end. And yeah, I've seen apps like online, and usually like I don't know, I've not seen too many sales. Like I often see ones that are like a few $100 MRR, if that, but they sell for like usually like a one, maybe 1.5x
Yep.
on MRR. So yeah, the 4.5 plus the other sort of, yeah, with the structure of the deal, it just made sense. So yeah, I didn't really have that many regrets. I feel like, yeah, honestly, no.
Yeah. No, no, makes complete sense. And I'm curious, like, so I think like this exit was especially interesting because like you said, like apps usually don't sell, so I'm wondering like from your perspective, what do you think made this one so like, help the deal happen so quickly, or made this Runify so attractive to buyers?
Yeah, I think what would be interesting in a moment is you touch on like maybe the sort of the outreach sort of process. Like you guys would have obviously like came across me and then like looked into the product and then seen um like yeah, why would you even reach out? But I think like a few things that did help with the business like actually selling was the
Yeah.
buyer had like there was a few random reasons which just made Runify make sense for the buyer.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
buyer had without like saying too much because I don't know what he wants me to say or not, but he has a portfolio of apps that fit within a couple niches, and Runify fit perfectly within that. He was actively looking for an app in that space, And then he also has like a development team, like a distribution sort of team. And in those teams, like there's a couple of them who are massive into running. Like that's what
Yeah.
they do as well with their hobbies. There was just like I've said this to a couple of my buddies, which I spoke to. There were a couple random things that just came together
Mhm.
that made the deal make sense for both parties. And I think that helped like with one like the like getting like a decent size sort of valuation based off the age of the app, but also just getting the deal over the line.
No, definitely. Definitely. I think like any good negotiation, like both sides feel like they're winning a little bit, losing a little bit. You know, you can't have like everything be perfect for both sides. And yeah, I definitely, I really agree with what you said, right? Because as much as there is like product market fit, there's also that founder market fit. You know, like and we can mention so 1 Degree Labs, which is the buyer. They have a portfolio of apps, and like you mentioned, like this does fit well into their ethos, right? Their thesis of wellness, and also they have multiple team members that are very passionate about running, which naturally helps them understand the target user much better, understand, and also not just that, but they could actually evaluate this app and see like, hey, this is genuinely unique, right? They've tried many different running apps before and they felt like, hey, this actually has something that's different, right? Something that we've not seen in the other apps before and it's well built, right? So I think that that was a huge plus for us, and especially because we had technical people who are also very into running, so they were able to give us that sort of insight there. And yeah, I think you had mentioned like how we reached out to you. I think that's honestly a pretty interesting. So the way we were sourcing deals for this buyer is that he was specifically looking at apps, iOS or Android. He was pretty open on that side, but generally around the health and wellness space. Right, so based on that, we were first of all, we had scraped like all of the top 100, top couple hundred apps in these sectors, and we had run cold emails to them. And we were doing like cold email and LinkedIn, but I felt like we weren't really taking full advantage on Twitter because I knew that there was so much of this like app mafia and stuff like that on Twitter, right? So I asked my analysts, just to literally like just go search iOS app, search like building app, building in public, iOS, stuff like that, these keywords, and then just find everybody who's tweeting about this, right, in the last couple of days and check out their app. And if any of those fit our criteria, then we can reach out to them. Right. So initially, when we reached out to you guys, my analyst, he felt like, okay, this app seems relevant, but the main problem was that, oh, it's super new, right? It's only so I think we had actually waited a couple of days before reaching out to you. But yeah, I think as soon as we showed our client at 1 Degree Labs the app itself, like they were very like the interest was very apparent right from the start. What, like, how did you really make that decision to sell or not? Because I think at that point, there was still a lot of different unknowns. You didn't know whether or not we would really go through with it, right? And you would lose a lot of momentum, in your current app. And I think that that's a question that a lot of like sellers or would-be sellers struggle with. So yeah, I'm curious how you made that decision.
Yeah, I think I've got two sort of different parts for that answer. One was like even during the negotiation stage, like up to the LOI, once we'd signed the LOI, not as much, but like I was negotiating like pricing and valuation and like pretty much all sort of compensation without
Yeah.
knowing whether I'm actually going to take this. Like the sort of compensation obviously was tied to my answer, whether this makes the most sense. But yeah,
Yeah.
during a lot of the like the negotiation phase, I wasn't actually sure whether I would go through with it, and that's kind of a normal sort of thing on both ends. Like you said, like whether if I knew you guys were going to go through it, like in my mind, it was like I'm trying to get like what's also like fair for both sides if we're serious about doing the deal, but I want to get my money's worth for a product which I'm like very bullish on. Like you said, it is a new app, which sometimes is a negative, but sometimes that is also like a positive.
So if we can just double click a bit into the negotiations itself, what was due diligence like from your side?
Honestly, like this was like, yeah, like you said, my first sort of acquisition. So it was
Hmm.
a new experience. And I was like, I need to make sure I'm not getting like scammed here. And so like as much as like going through the I think like obviously jumping on call. I think we had maybe like three calls, but
Yeah.
like throughout that we would have like mini calls where we would chat and then I'll jump off for a little bit and then we'll jump on. So we probably had like a series of like five, six conversations at least before like anything serious was signed. And it got to a point where I was like, yeah, we signed the LOI and it's like things were getting serious. And like up to that stage, I didn't actually have to be careful because the only thing that like, if it say it was a scam or a risk, like the only thing I was losing was time. But once the
Yeah.
LOI was signed, then like you're starting to hand over personal details, company stuff, that's like
Mhm.
where it gets risky. So like as that process, because it takes a little while to write up the LOI, as that process was going on, just like looking at your guys' sort of website, looking into you as an individual, looking at the buyer as an individual, pretty much anything I could come across. The buyer's like previous work.
Yeah.
He's like a little bit
Yeah.
older than I am, so he's a bit more of like a work track record, looking into
Yeah.
some of those
Yeah.
companies. But yeah, that was ultimately it. I feel like there wasn't too much to do
No, makes sense,
besides
but
that.
it's really important to do it as a seller, like you needed your background checks, you need to make sure that you're yeah, verifying everything, so that you're not coming up into problems later on. Yeah, I'm wondering like how did you like how did you prioritize between cash up front versus maybe like cash over time or taking like a larger revenue share? Like, was your mindset just get as much cash up front as possible, or were you looking to more maximize, the total outcome?
Yeah, I think I was actually going to touch on this one thing, which I forgot to say, is like as part of the deal, I kept like
Hmm.
equity, which was like a big
Yeah.
element
Yeah.
to why I like actually committed to selling because it was this like idea of like, okay, I can like sell now and then keep some equity and then like it's
True.
like the saying like you're better off having like 10% equity of a watermelon over like 70% of a grape. I still had that upside of the potential growth of Runify as well as like I was taking a lot of risk off the table.
Hmm.
Yeah, sorry, what was your question again?
Yeah, no, but I think the reduction of risk is something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs should really always be thinking about. Because like generally we are naturally just taking on a lot of risk, and whatever opportunity we can get to like reduce that risk, we should try our best to take those. So yeah, yeah, I think about things often like that too. So I had asked you like, how did you prioritize between like getting cash up front versus cash over time? Because we did have like a fairly, tiered and kind of structured deal. Um,
Yeah, honestly, like that again, like negotiation was kind of new to me. My like sort of thought process was there was two things I sort of did. Like one was like just optimizing for like to an extent to like the highest valuation because then if
yeah.
you do like percentages based off that, they just like work in your favor. But then second to that was kind of like considering a number which like I would be happy with for selling the company with if
Hmm.
none of the like debt like say like the next day I sold it, it went to zero.
Yeah.
Like yeah, there was no more income coming in after that first initial cash amount. I was happy
Hmm.
to sell the company for that. If it was just that alone, then I wouldn't do it. But like I wouldn't be upset and feel like I made a mistake if that kind of occurred. So kind
Hmm.
of like having that baseline amount of cash up front
Got it.
was valuable, but yeah, that like specific amount is a certain amount that I'm happy with if that's all I got. And then anything past that's kind of extra. Um,
No, that makes a lot of sense. You secure like some type of baseline, and then you can take more risk with the other payments. And especially if you're confident in the business, then it's not that much of a risk at all. I'm curious, like, what advice do you have, for let's say yourself 6 months ago or even a couple of months ago? How would you approach like building an app that's sellable?
I think like building an app that's sellable, like I think like apps are like one of the like harder businesses to necessarily sell, especially like in today's age, like with
Yeah,
vibe coding, like it's getting to a
yeah,
point where like the underlying technology is like almost irrelevant and worthless because you can like most apps you can like vibe code like 80% in like a couple days, and even like sort of high value apps, I mean like technical apps, like you can still like do it in a matter of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few things to consider. Like I wouldn't recommend like ever the majority of people know that social is very hard to build in, but I think like having like a social element to the app is like it doesn't even have to be social actually, but some sort of moat within inside the app. Like there's a lot of apps that are like very simple in its core, but they might have like a community of like 100,000 people like within that app. That's like not like someone can't come in and like replicate that. So that's value to a buyer. And we definitely had that to an extent. Obviously, our numbers weren't crazy because we were at month one. But like you
Mm-hmm.
touched on in the beginning as well, it's just like, and this wasn't even on purpose. Like we weren't doing it from the stance of being organized so that a buyer can come in and they can do their due diligence. Like being organized, I think is like undervalued. That was a big thing when I worked at 10x that Blake pushed on like everyone when we were working on pretty much anything, sorry. There would be like a Google Doc. It can be like a couple lines, but it's like goal, outcome, like what we're doing. Pretty much like him as the CEO, like wanted the ability to be able to come in to pretty much anyone's domain, be able to read a document and kind of get an idea of what's going on and
Yeah.
like see what's going on, see how it's going, and being able to do that in all the sort of different departments.
I totally agree with
Yeah,
you. Like, you need the organization, you need that structure, because anybody looking to buy it, like, they don't want to buy that work as well, you know? They want to just have everything ready for them to, like, to hit the ground running with. Yeah, no, I think that advice makes a lot of sense. Wondering like, do you think that right now, because like I see that the moat for most apps has almost entirely disappeared, you know, where it's all about the distribution. So do you think now like apps are going to be more valued based on the distribution that comes with them? Or do you think it's, you know, still going to be like apps are just going to be hard to sell in general? You know, like it's just going to be too competitive. Yeah, do you think, you know, that's going to change as like the kind of cream rises to the top?
yeah, I think like the moats are definitely becoming like less valuable, and like you said, yeah, the moats turning into distribution. And when I mentioned like the moat, like distribution is like the best moat possible. Like Cal AI, for example, is in a very good position from a distribution stance. Like they're very difficult to compete with in
Yeah.
like even with there's a couple apps like Cal AI is actually a good example, but they have like a monopoly on like a lot of creators. Like either they've ran through creators and like squeeze that through, or they've like actively got them on board. Like if you were trying to come in, like when I was actually looking to do some work with influencers, like reaching out to um yeah, influencers online, I found that Runner as well had like sort of this like monopoly sort of
Oh,
vibe on some of these influencers. Like not to an
yeah.
extent, not to the extent that maybe Cal AI did, but like there was a lot of people that I wanted to work with, and like no, sorry, like we're working with Runner. So sort of building these partnerships is super interesting. But then also another element of it, like to do with like the moat and like being able to sell an app. I think it's something that's like not talked about very much is, but you need to be able to give your buyer like confidence that one that like they're going to make their money back and like tenfold, but that there's like still things to explore. Like lots of
Yeah.
people will build an app, say it's like takes a month or two, they will like work on it for 6, 12, 18 months, whatever, and like they squeeze as much out of it. They try every distribution channel, they try paid ads, they try influencers. Like it's some things work, like maybe they're making money, they're not growing anymore, and like that's when they look to sell, like when revenue is declining, when like the numbers don't look great, there's not much for them to yeah, not much for them to do. Like with Runify, for example, we built on Swift, so we still don't even have an Android app. We haven't localized any languages. We pretty much all our traffic was through organic. Like we hadn't done paid, we hadn't done UGC, we hadn't done influencers, and like there was evidence of those sort of like distribution channels and like being successful for other running apps. So that was like a viable solution for the buyer to pursue, as well as all the sort of like technical stuff. And that was a big thing is that as I had like a very clear roadmap of like what we wanted to do with the product. And that wasn't even like set up because I was telling the buyer, like we had a roadmap, probably if like we had, I would say like 2, 3 months worth of tasks to do to improve the product for us. But from the buyer's perspective, coming in and saying like, okay, there's like a direct roadmap and they want to do this because they think it's going to result in this, and having like 5 different steps along um, the journey. So they're not just coming into this app like um, with like limited knowledge of the technology. They have to figure out distribution. They pretty much have to figure it all out. Like that's a big turn off. If you're able to kind of like help them in that transition phase, that's like super valuable.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. And do you have any advice for people specifically for that 0 to 1 phase? Because I think that that's something which I was especially like I learned a lot from your processes. So yeah, how would you, help somebody go from 0 to actually building their first app?
Do you mind giving me the definition of 0 to 1? What do you
Yes,
mean
for
by that
sure.
exactly?
For
Like,
sure.
do you mean
For
like
sure.
from launch to X revenue, or like idea to
No.
product, or idea to revenue? Yeah.
100%. So, what I would define as 0 is knowing that you want to build an app, but not knowing anything beyond that, right? And what I would define as 1 is, let's say you've decided an idea and you've started building the app, at least for these purpose, for this conversation, yeah.
So a bit more technical focused.
I'd say more around like how you find and choose that specific idea and maybe how you validate it. How do you know whether that's the right idea? Because I think a lot of people are often stuck where they have like they're just constantly going through different ideas, right? They like create 3 apps in 6 months, but they're not really like able to focus. They're not able to get themselves to commit to one thing.
Yeah. I think like the most valuable thing you can do, which I touched on into the beginning, is that like
Yeah,
early sort of like validation stage. Like I think there's like 2 ways you can do it. I think the way I would go about it now is like write up like legit like write up a physical thesis and
hmm,
have like a couple dot points. What I like to do is like why I think this is going to work, like 5 dot
yeah,
points, why this isn't going to work. And even use like chat, that's what I was using, like use chat GPT. And I was like, I would say like be as brutal as possible. Tell me every reason why like Runify is going to fail. And it would give me like very real reasons why it could fail. And then you can
yeah,
use that to like validate the sort of idea. But then you can also use that to like um, find ways to prevent that from happening before they do. And then the next sort of like stage of like validation is looking at competitors. Like for example, I looked at Liftoff, look at Strava, look at Runner, look at pretty much like whatever you're building in, look at what they're doing. A good sort of like stance is like you want a couple apps that are actually making like I would say over $100,000 a month. That's like each app I work on, I kind of like update my checklist. And that's one thing I've updated recently is like if I'm going to be committing to a new idea, I want there to be around 2 to 3 apps that are like within that 100K range.
yeah,
And that's for 2 reasons. One, there's like validation from like a user perspective. People want to use the app, they want to pay for the app. But two, there's then that there's a way to get those users. Like if those apps are making that much money, then they have distribution systems. Like they either have paid ads that are working, they have influencer campaigns, they have UGC campaigns, and like these you can copy and not directly copy because again, you're just always going to be behind, but
yeah,
being able to
yeah.
mimic that and make it work for your app. And that's exactly what I did with Runify. Like the format that I used for the early stage distribution, which I like pushed all the traffic to the landing site and the Stripe payment was legit a lift-off video, which they were ripping for ages to get lots of views to their app. I just took that, applied it to Runify, took that traffic, and I was not even taking it from them because it's a completely different domain.
Hmm.
And that was like super valuable from a validation perspective. And then even going a step further, which is like interesting, is like look into the distribution channels. There's
Yeah,
like look into how would you do influencers. So
yeah,
before I started building, I had a list of 100 influencers who I'd be like, these people would be dope to work with. One, it's valuable because you can like reach out to them when you have a product. But two, it's just like, are there influencers that make sense to work with this product? Because that was one thing with my very first app, the sort of like niche problem, there was like no influencers. It just didn't make sense for them to market
Yeah.
that product to their audience, and then do that for every social channel. So I went through Reddit and looked at every running sort of community, and you can kind of get a gauge of how popular like running is by just the size of these communities.
No, I think that's some really, really helpful advice, especially for validating, because yeah, I think that that's something that people always struggle with, and just having a framework to do that really, really can help.
And I think with what you said, like distribution is becoming the moat, and that's like
Yeah.
every month that's becoming like even more true. Even like from when I launched Runify to now, it's like a complete different game. So I would recommend this even more. But like, don't build your product. Like, set yourself like I need to get like a thousand email list subscribers. I need to make 500. Like, we made like almost $1,000 from like signups for Runify before we even had a product. And whether that
Hmm.
means you just like one thing that you can do is just build a web funnel. Look, there's
Yeah.
so many apps which are crushing it that have like that's one thing that's super valuable about mobile apps is everything's like public. You can look at Cal AI, you can look at Strava, you can look at Flow, you can like see these revenue numbers they're doing, and then you just go through their onboarding and see what they're doing, and like do that for your niche. So say you decided you wanted to do, I don't know, a woman's like period tracking app. You could go through Flow, look at what they do, and look at the other apps, and then you can build like a web funnel and put it to a Stripe link and start making content for them, or start running paid ads or pay an influencer. Like, you're much better off spending like $500. Like, either you spend your time or spend like $500, $1,000, like validating this product, trying to get users, because a lot of the time you can acquire those users and then use them later once you actually have the product. But it saves you a hell lot of it. It saves you so much time rather than spending 2 months, 3 months like building this product and realizing like I don't know how to distribute this.
Yeah. 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 No, that's very true. That's very true. Like you need to validate it well. You need to make sure that forget even like having a plan, how you're gonna distribute it. Do you have any like contrarian views on the current like app ecosystem?
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a strange place with all these like vibe coding apps. Like, I think some of these like vibe coding products are like advertising that like there's been like 10 million apps built through these like products, but it's just like so much slop. I think like Superwool posted a I think the founder of Superwool posted like a couple weeks ago that like there was something like only 300, maybe, yeah, maybe only 300 apps making like 100K a month, and then like a couple thousand making like 10K a month. And there was some stupid stat where it was like 94% of apps like didn't make $1 in the first 3 months. So yeah, I think like the vibe coding sort of apps, like it's like, well, like, yeah, products, they're dope for like founders to be able to enter the market, but I think in result you just get a lot of like shitty slop, especially the products where it's like one prompt to the app store live. Even with vibe coding, which like I leverage, especially like I can have a team of like 2, 3 developers, and we like leverage AI. We still will take like at least a week, 2 weeks to build out a proper app. Like, if you're not doing that, I feel like that's a mistake, and like that is quite against the grain that you see on Twitter. Like, people say just like vibe code this app, get it on the app store, distribute. But I think having that sort of like small time commitment to get it right, build out your onboarding, understand your flow, and I think that also helps with like being able to commit to a product long term as well. Like, it's one thing that like I think everyone struggles with, but a lot of the apps that make the majority of the money have been on the App Store for 3, 4, 5 years, and it's only a very, very few amount that have like made money, like pretty instantly. And even so,
Mm-hmm.
like some of those examples, like Quitter and Cal AI, yes, they made money instantly. Like, I think Quitter did 10, 15K in the first month, Cal AI did 30. But now
Mm.
when like they're posting about their like Cal AI has been doing like 3 million months, Quitter had like a few 500K months. They've been in like they've been live for over a year now, and that's what people don't really see.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's pretty. No, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, I know this was your first exit. I'm wondering if you've spoken to other app founders that have had exits of a similar size, or I'm curious, like, do you think this was like a typical exit, or was it different in any way, compared to the other stories that you've heard?
I think I've got like a small, I don't have much to go off. I have a couple sort of. founders which I've spoke to, I think ours isn't as traditional, like just due to like the nature of the deal and the sort of like moving parts. Like one, keeping equity,
Yeah.
like there's debt associated, there was a salary associated, there was cash up front, like there was quite a few
Mhm.
moving parts where like usually at like this size it's like 100% buyout.
Yes.
So I think
Yes.
in that degree it was different. But yeah, again, I think there was like it was different in the sense that like it was quite a decent validate valuation on the revenue, which like we talked about due
Mhm.
to the yeah what we mentioned in the past. But I think also what I've heard is like lots of people have had like really shitty experiences with selling, whether
Yeah.
that's through like the
Yeah.
middleman or like the sort of like the process that they've had to go through. Like I spoke to one of my buddies and he was in a situation where he was with his co-founder and his co-founder really wanted to sell, but he didn't. But then so they ended up just settling for something that they didn't really want to, and then they
Mm.
had to pay like a really big fee to like the middleman, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, they just didn't have like a great process.
Mm. Mm.
Interestingly, I've had so many people reach out to me like who are interested in selling apps and like how I did that. And a lot of the time, I don't have too much advice for them because I'm like, it kind of really just fell in my lap. Like we talked about, you
Yeah.
reached out to me. I wasn't planning on selling. There was like a couple characteristics of the deal which like made sense for both parties. Quite a few things which I don't think like is as common as you might think. Which yeah, in result made the deal actually happen.
Yeah, dude, no, that makes a lot of sense. And please feel free to send those sellers our way. We're always happy to look at potential deals. I'd love to hear a bit about like what your experience was like working with Pocket Fund specifically, because I think it was mainly like the two of us doing most of the negotiations, and then I'd interact with the buyer a little bit, but I don't think you really interacted with the buyer until after the LOI, and then, everything was pretty much like closed up and ready to go.
Yeah, no, you guys were really good to work with. It was like because at first I wasn't sure like the sort of structure. I was like, I wasn't sure if you were like working directly with them or if you were this sort of middleman sort of situation. In the end, I ended up asking, but it's like definitely an interesting perspective to be in because obviously like your incentives lie with like one getting a deal done, but you also want the deal to be like a decent sized deal
Yep.
because there's compensation with that. But then it's also about getting a good price for the buyer. So like
Yep.
it was interesting to see like the your objective of like trying to find like you said like the most even sort of deal where like yes like both sides are winning but there's a bit of sacrifice on both
Hmm.
ends, and I touched on it before like it wasn't like a brute force like smackdown on one side. Like a lot of times like founders don't necessarily understand like what they're sitting on, and like some people don't even understand like the concept of like how valuations are made.
True. Yeah.
Honestly, if I didn't listen to like podcasts like My First Million and stuff like, and if I was a younger founder, for example, I would have no idea. Like,
Yeah.
there's,
Yeah.
but yeah, overall, you guys were pretty good. I remember I would hassle you a lot with like the LOI and like all the specific terms, and but yeah, all came from I think
No, it's
the
it's
right
it's
place,
valid.
and yeah,
And you need to be safe, like it's not like a small amount of money, and it is obviously like you want to make sure everything is done the right way, you want to dot all the I's, just make sure there's no stone unturned, there's nothing that, no kind of surprises that come later on. Awesome. So to finish off this episode, I just have a couple of rapid fire questions for you. Awesome. So the first one is, would you prefer to be bootstrapped or VC funded?
I don't know if either. It has to really depend on the app, the situation, and like what you're building. I would say, yeah, it really depends. Like if you're an app like Kali, where you can just like be a dog and just like destroy an industry, like and
Yeah.
do that through creating like a pretty much new distribution channel. Like they really like one popularized like influencer marketing, but they like MyFitnessPal wasn't doing influencer marketing, and like they had like three, four founders who like worked extremely hard. I think that sort of situation is like interesting to be bootstrapped, where like a VC sort of perspective might be like there's this big problem that's very difficult to build in, but like if you can pull it off, then like you're a big player in the space and like you have a monopoly. Like there's an app called Reframe, for example. Like they are
Yeah.
the only app that like makes any decent money like in the quit drinking space. I think they do like for anywhere from 400 to 800K a month, and like the app below that is doing like 10K a month. So they're like a pretty big player in that space, and they're like um, the leading force of that. And like I don't know how much money they're actually spending on distribution. They might be spending double that and like operating like really unprofitably, but obviously their players like looking for
Yeah. No, definitely. And so the next one is, would you prefer like product-led growth or sales-led growth?
sales-led growth. I think like distribution is like king. I think product-led growth is very difficult to crack. I don't know many people who have like successfully cracked it.
Makes sense, makes sense. And what has been your best business purchase for under $1,000?
Hmm. Probably just monitors. I've got a widescreen monitor and like a vertical one.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
vertical one's like super valuable. I also bought this camera, which is like not bad. Actually, probably no, my standing desk would be for sure.
Nice, nice. I love it. So the last question I have for you is if you were speaking to a wannabe app founder, right, looking to either start their app or start monetizing their app from this week onwards, what would you say is the number one actionable thing they should do this week?
I think there's like two sort of answers. One, the first answer would be like find like your domain that makes sense for you, like whether it's like Pokemon cards or whether it's like car spotting or whether it's like whatever sport you play, like figure out a
Yeah.
domain and try and go viral on social media. You don't need to
Mm,
have any sort of for every single like every domain that like potentially has an app, like there'll be videos that have gone viral that you can find and like
yeah.
try and
Yeah.
replicate that in your own way. Or like a second answer would probably just like low key the app mafia course is like super valuable to a beginner. It goes
Mm.
over like probably like 8 out of 10 things that you need to know, and you could smash that out in a day, and have a decent idea of like what to do next.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Awesome. Dude, thank you so much for joining on this episode. I think this was super valuable. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with the audience? Anything that you want to shout out?
Hmm. Well, yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. It's actually been super fun to chat about it, especially because it's been
Yeah.
like a couple months. I think we ended up selling in August, or I don't know. It's been like 3 4
Yes,
months. So
yes.
to yeah, it's a little bit of a flashback talking about it and like piecing it together. That's been dope. Yeah, honestly, distribution's king. Like that's legit all that matters now. Uh, yeah, with vibe coding, like you can just vibe code an app to like 90% in a week.
Facts, facts. I love it, dude. I think that's a great note to end the episode on. And it's been honestly, dude, I really appreciate the time. It's really nice. Like this is our first episode with a seller that we've worked with, where we saw the deal from zero to the exit. And yeah, hopefully this is just like the start of our relationship. And yeah, ideally in a couple of months, who knows when, we're doing another episode with another exit in mind.
Yeah, that'll be awesome. Hopefully, that's a conversation we can have again.